Module 6, Lesson 2 notes on the rise of nationalism. In the previous modules and previous sections, we've talked about how our nation received a new national spirit. And that era was called the era of good feelings. And it kind of all spawns out of the post-war of 1812 time period, where America kind of gets back into the game of economics and trade, and it really becomes a player in the world again with the end of the embargo and the end of the War of 1812. And America has a new national spirit, and there are several contributing factors to that, and that's what we're going to look at today. This how this new national spirit rises. Okay, so go ahead and open it up, and that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so first off, one of the ways in which the national power is boosted, it comes from within, and it comes from the form of our Supreme Court. All right, and to give you an example, Robert Fulton, as you probably know, he was one of the inventors of the steamboat. And in 1808, Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston, they both received a charter from the state of New York saying that they were given the exclusive right to operate steamboats on the Hudson River in their part of the state. So they essentially were granted a monopoly, which is exclusive control of a single good or activity. And they profited enormously from this charter by charging steamboat operators for licenses to operate on the various stretches of the river that they were allowed. One of the operators who paid a license to Fulton and Livingston was a guy named Aaron Ogden. He was fully licensed to operate in the state of New York to run his steamship between the states of New York and the state of New Jersey, where the Hudson River is. Okay, so he believed that he was the only operator entitled because he paid for a license to do so. And then a guy by the name of Thomas Gibbons, he began to operate a similar service on the same stretch of the river. So he claimed he was entitled to do so under the federal law. So Ogden took Gibbons to court to stop him. And in 1824, the Supreme Court ruled that interstate commerce could be regulated only by the federal government. In other words, Ogden's exclusive right granted by New York was not legal since the route crossed state lines. So this Supreme Court case, Gibbons versus Ogden, gives Congress, clarified that Congress had the authority over interstate commerce, which is commerce that takes place between two states. So all Supreme Court decisions are important, and this one's no different because it leads to future rulings that are going to favor competition over monopoly. In this way, nationalism exerts a strong influence, and it shows how it is at work in our nation's legal system. Another Supreme Court case that happened as a contemporary with that one is McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819. Just like in Gibbons v. Ogden, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was John Marshall, and he was put in there. He's a Federalist. He was there for 30 or 40 years. And he had a large role in strengthening the federal government's control over the economy. But what this one is about, the way it makes the United States government stronger and have the federal government stronger, is that the Bank of the United States that was created out of Alexander Hamilton's plan and then further with the American system, the state of Maryland levied a heavy tax on a particular branch of that bank, of the Bank of the United States, in hopes that it would fail because the state of Maryland wanted to have state banks. So John Marshall declared that basically the states are not allowed to tax the federal government, so because the power to tax is the power to destroy. So in doing so, he declares the national bank as totally fair and legal and constitutional, and that states have no right to tax the bank. So it puts limits on the state's powers. And there's lots of other court cases like Fletcher versus Peck, Dartmouth College versus Woodward, which Dartmouth is a university that still exists today. It's in New Hampshire, and basically the court declared the state of New Hampshire could not revise the original charter, which which was originated in colonial times. It's a very old university. But basically, it said that the states are not permitted to interfere with contracts. Only the federal government can do that. So the Supreme Court of the United States of America does a lot to limit the power of the states and increase the power of the federal government during this nationalist time period or era of good feelings. Okay, nationalism even goes so far as to shape our foreign policy. The Secretary of State and future President of the United States was John Quincy Adams, and he was an excellent Secretary of State, maybe one of our best in the history of America. Not the greatest president, but an excellent Secretary of State. And he established our policy that was going to be guided by nationalism, or the belief that the national interests should be put ahead of regional interests. So one of the things in which he does is he forged a treaty with Great Britain to reduce the amount of ships that the British would have, as far as military vessels goes, on the Great Lakes. So both the United States and Great Britain are going to reduce the fleets to only a few military vessels on the Great Lakes, and that's called the Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817. Excuse me. In addition to demilitarizing that common border, they're also going to set the boundary between the United States and Canada at the 49th parallel over to the Rocky Mountains. That's a boundary that still exists today. It goes from the tip of Lake Superior, the western tip of Lake Superior, all the way to the Rocky Mountains. Today it extends all the way to the Pacific Ocean, but at that time we only went to the Rocky Mountains. And also, they're going to come to an agreement on what to do with the Oregon Territory, which is where that 49th parallel ended at the Rocky Mountains, which does cause some problems in the future. But at the time, it smooths over some concerns when it comes to how the Oregon Territory would be shared. And that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to share it. It's going to be dual ownership. Both the United States and Great Britain will share ownership of the Oregon Territory. And I'm sure you can pretty well see that that's not going to work out very well in the future. All right. Another piece of business that John Adams was greatly responsible with was the acquisition of Spanish Florida, which most people thought would become part of the United States eventually anyways. Because by the year 1819, Spain they were a failing power, a failing superpower. They had become too weak to enforce their own laws in their own nation, much less policies in the New World territories. And so Spain cedes Florida to the United States and any claim that they had in the Oregon Territory, because that was going to be shared and claimed by the United States and Great Britain. So essentially, the Adams-Onis Treaty allows the United States to take possession of this area of Florida. Okay, once was Spanish, now, and as a result of this, it becomes American. It does not make Florida a state, but it makes Florida an American territory, which eventually allows for it to become a state. Okay, all right. As time goes on, and the War of 1812 passes, and more time passes, and Napoleon, things happen in Europe. Napoleon is defeated, the guy who had conquered much of Europe. Now much of Europe can kind of have some peace with, everybody can begin to, instead of protecting their own borders, they begin to look to the Western Hemisphere and draw their attention there, since there's no longer a threat from within. So with the French defeated, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the British, French, everybody wants to begin to reclaim their former territories in Latin America. Meanwhile, Russia, who had been in Alaska, were establishing trading posts in what is now California. And so what we as Americans are seeing is that all these old world powers are trying to move back into our part of the world, whether it be the Spanish and the Portuguese in their old colonial areas, or new empires like Russia pushing in from the northwest. the United States felt like it had to do something. So James Monroe, he was president of the United States, and he wanted to send a warning to all foreign powers outside of the Western Hemisphere that they need to stay out. That this is our territory. That this half of planet Earth is American, and that any attempt to create newly independent republics or any action that would be considered dangerous to our peace and safety will not be tolerated, and it would involve America getting involved. Now, at this time, America, we're like a dog with no teeth. Yeah, it might bite you, but it's not going to hurt because we're not very powerful. So at the time of the Monroe Doctrine, it's nobody really cares, but this is a doctrine that gets carried over into present day, and we're no longer a dog without teeth anymore. And so if people that try to get involved in affairs in Latin America and the Western Hemisphere in general have to deal with the United States. So it's called the Monroe Doctrine because it was issued by President Monroe. And basically, this is a bold expression of nationalism. The president of the United States is declaring his intention to defend American interests, even if it meant taking on the powerful nations of Europe. We had no powerful army. We had no powerful navy. We really had no ability to enforce the Monroe Doctrine at the time when James Monroe created it. But it did win great support from an old enemy in Great Britain, because they did have a navy strong enough to take action, and it was in their interest to not see any new European powers involved in the New World, because they were already there and established. So the Monroe Doctrine really creates a partnership between the United States and Great Britain, which becomes a long-standing alliance, an alliance that does still exist today, and that alliance is really due to the Monroe Doctrine, because it put America and Great Britain, two nations which had had fought two wars in the last 2.5 decades, finally made them, I'm not going to say friends, but allies. Okay? As nationalism increases, you begin to see more and more people moving into the West. In the next unit, we'll look into, or next module, we'll look into how Texas becomes part of the United States. But we're moving into the West. We're pushing more to the West. Now, at this time, around the 1820s, the West is, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky. This is the West. All right, it's not out here. It's kind of what we would call the Midwest today. But a lot of people are moving into Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and there's some reasons why a lot of people are pushing into these lands. So some people are criminals and they want to escape the law. Many people are in debt and they want to escape their debt. Land, you could go there. Land was plentiful and fertile, and it was also cheap because there was so much of it. So there was social gains to be made. There was money to be made. And this westward expansion changes the political nature of our country, because as our Constitution is written, once a territory's population reaches 60,000, those people could apply for admission into the United States of America. They draft a state constitution, elect representatives, and they can become part of the United States themselves. So, and then with statehood comes the ability to vote in national elections, like the president. So, it definitely could create some conflict, especially over the issue of slavery. And this is where we have to come to some common ground. Because Missouri was one of those states that by 1819 people had settled in. They had requested their admission into the United States. However, is Missouri going to be entered as a free state or a slave state? At the time Missouri applied to become a state, the balance of power in the United States consisted of 10 free states and 10 slave states. So there was a balance, all right? Now, Southerners expected that Missouri would become the 11th slave state. And because Illinois was going to be admitted as a free state, and that would keep it on an even keel. All right. So, but in order that's what Southerners expected, that it would be the 11th slave state, as Illinois would be the 11th free state. So, but the people of Missouri, they were, the slaveholding states claimed that Northerners, they see Northern involvement with Missouri trying to be made a free state. They see that as an attempt to try to end slavery for good forever. And Northerners accuse Southerners of plotting against their institution. Really good, they're making up lies about one another. So, you see what's going on in the world today in America and people getting incorrect information. It's not a new thing. Even as early as 1820, people were creating false facts for their own benefit. So, but needless to say, hostilities like today were inevitable, just as they were in 1820. And at times, hostilities became so intense that both sides even mentioned the Civil War and the end of the Union. So, indeed, these issues came to light. They definitely foreshadow the Civil War to come in the 1860s, but it is avoided in 1820. And the reason for that is because of one of my favorite Americans, Henry Clay. He is known as the Great Compromiser, and under the leadership of Henry Clay, he temporarily resolves the crisis by creating what we now refer to as the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And these are the parts of it. All right, so Missouri was going to be admitted as a slave state, and so it is. Missouri becomes a slave state. In addition, Maine is going to be admitted as a free state. All right, so Maine was admitted as a free state, Missouri admitted as a slave state, thus preserving the sectional balance of power. The rest of the Louisiana Territory, the land that we received and the Louisiana Purchase, just 19 or so years prior, 17 years prior, that's up for debate. And the Missouri Compromise says that we're going to draw a line at the 36 degree 30 minutes north latitude line. And that's this yellow line right here. It's a line of latitude. And it's the southern border of Missouri, and it's going to extend outward. Everything north of this line will be slavery will be forever banned. Anything south of this line is open to slavery. Not guaranteed to be slavery, but open to slavery. With the and then obviously Missouri is the exception because it's north of the line. But that is the Missouri Compromise. All right, so you get Maine enters as a free state, Missouri enters as a slave state. They draw a line of latitude at 36 degrees, 30 minutes. Everything north will have slavery forever banned, with the exception of Missouri. Everything south in the new territories will be open to slavery. So really the only territory that was up for question is potentially Texas, but Texas isn't even American territory. It belongs to Mexico in 1820. And then all this belongs to Spain. So, and this is Indian territory. So it really is more beneficial to the North, as they thought this would kind of be the end of slavery. So despite the fears of some Americans, President Monroe, he signs the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And for a generation, the problem of slavery in federal territories seemed to be settled, but obviously we know that it's not. It's not the last time the issue of slavery would arise, and future politicians would have to create more and more compromises to try to alleviate this issue. Okay, so that's all of Module 6.2. I think it's 6.2. And, America's built on compromises. It's even in our Constitution. But these compromises sometimes can do more harm than good. Because slavery was a massive problem. And it's kind of like, I like to call it like, you get hit in the head with a hammer. You're messed up. And then so somebody comes and puts a Band-Aid on it and says, this is all better. Okay. Well, no, it's not. I just got hit in the head with a hammer. A Band-Aid's not going to do much good. That's kind of how the Missouri Compromise was. It puts a Band-Aid on it and it temporarily makes it feel better, but ultimately it doesn't do anything to solve the real problems. Okay, so I hope that you guys are keeping interested. You're keeping up with your notes, and as soon as I know anything about exams, I'll let you know. I haven't been given any guidance from anybody that makes more money than me. So as soon as I find out something, you guys will be the first to know. So take care. If you have questions or comments, don't hesitate to shoot me a message on Schoology, email. Let me know if you need to talk to me. I'll do a Teams meeting with you. Anything you want. I'm also available twice a day on office hours, and you can see that link in the materials of Schoology. So take it easy, and I will hopefully see you soon.